Welcome to Album Soup, where we go over the various ingredients, influences, and styles that shape a particular album. Today, we are traveling the world with Stereolab, meaning that we are going through the various international influences that shaped the band's Magnus Opum album, Dots and Loops. I will admit I was a bit late to the party with Stereolab. I think I tried to get into their noise pop stuff earlier, which I do like now, but isn't the easiest entry point. And it was only after seeing them live a few months ago that I really began to appreciate their artistry. And Dots and Loops is still my favorite album. It's definitely the entry point that any newcomer should start with. And I think it's such an amazing album with so many different styles and ideas going on that I really want to delve deep into it. So without further ado, I'm just going to get into some of the different styles from around the world that Stereolab clearly pulled from, and some albums in each of those styles that they liked or they probably liked that you should check out if you like their sound. First up, we're going to Brazil, and I'm going to talk about a couple of bossa nova albums. First up, we have Astro Gilberto with the Astro Gilberto album. I think if you listen to Letícia singing on a Stereolab album, you can definitely hear this Brazilian influence, and I think Astro Gilberto is probably the biggest one you can hear. This is a classic bossa nova album. It is an excellent distillation of the genre, if you ask me. Definitely a great place to start, a very accessible and easy bossa nova album to listen to. Granted, a lot of bossa nova is relatively easy to listen to, but this is still one of my favorites. And the other bossa nova album I want to talk about is a bit less pure, but who cares? We're talking about the entire world. This would be Herb Alpert presents Sergio Mendes and Brazil 66. So Herb Alpert, if you don't know, was a trumpet player from the US, but he played a lot of Mexican style music. I'm not exactly sure how he did it or like the details or anything like that, but he definitely made some songs that you've heard, like Spanish Flea or Whipped Cream or whatever. And they actually include some of his music on this album blended with Brazilian music, like straight up in the same song. So that's very cool. They even cover the Beatles on this album. I think it's Help. Yeah, they cover Help on this album. Very cool stuff. Still great bossa nova, but with a lot of other things going on too. Something that I think Stereolab kind of embodies, and that I think they can appreciate very much. I think we can appreciate it as well. Okay, staying in Brazil, I'm going to talk about a bit of Tropicalia music. First up, I have Gal Costa with her self-titled album. Another singer that definitely influenced Letícia, or at least I think did. This album is, well, unlike bossa nova, Tropicalia music is a lot more psychedelic and pulls from other things. And this album, as a prototypical Tropicalia album, pulls from a lot of psychedelic rock as well as classic like samba and other Brazilian sounds. I'm not quite as into this stuff as I am into the easier bossa nova stuff, but it's still definitely worth a listen and still definitely kind of within that Stereolab sonic ecosystem. The next album, though, my other Tropicalia album, is one that I do really like, although I fully acknowledge it's an acquired taste. This is Os Mutantes with their self-titled album. It definitely will take a few lessons, most likely, but the Tropicalia and the psychedelic stuff going on in this album is so interesting, so cool, a lot better than a lot of the American bands were doing it in 1968. I mean, if you really go back and explore a lot of that early psychedelic stuff like I have, you might actually find it to be a bit disappointing. Like maybe the aesthetic seems cool, but a lot of that music sounds like they were just so high that they didn't really care what they were making. This is not that. These were really creative geniuses. I definitely recommend this album. Okay, now for my last two albums in Brazil, I'm going to talk about some jazz funk, I guess, for lack of a better word. A little bit later in time and stylistically pulling a bit more from jazz and funk than they are from these other Brazilian stuff, but still Brazilian and still cool. First up, I have Azimuth with, I guess is their self-titled too. Love this album. The opening song I had on repeat for like weeks after I first listened to it. It sounds like, or at least has a similar appeal to Tropo Blue, the Cortex album that you might know because it's sampled on Food, on One Beer. That album has a really kind of cool, mellow, jazzy electronic sound, as does this album. Similar appeals, I think if you like these guys, if you like that one, I know I'm getting kind of convoluted here, but they have collaborated with Madlib, and if that doesn't sell you, then I don't know what will. Next up, I have Som Imaginario with Matanca do Porco. This album is also kind of got some jazzy and funky elements, but it also goes a lot more, I don't know, stylistically broad than that. There are classical moments on here. There are prog moments on here. A lot of 70s zeitgeisty sounds, to be honest. The title track is this like epic multi-part suite. A really cool album. I don't like it as much as some of the others that I mentioned in this Brazilian section, but I'm still very glad I've listened to it. Okay, that's enough Brazil, and now we're going to go to talk about Germany. Now, a lot of the Brazilian albums were easy listening, at least the bossa nova ones were, whereas Germany is kind of known for the opposite. We're talking about some krautrock, which is definitely not easy listening, definitely not the easiest thing to check out, but is super influential to Stereolab sound and influential to music as a whole in the 20th century, so I can't recommend this stuff enough, especially if you're new to the genre. Krautrock, in a nutshell, is rock and roll that doesn't derive from the blues. And man, it led these bands to some very strange places. So I'm not actually talking about anything super, super weird or avant-garde in this section. There are much weirder krautrock examples out there, but I'm talking about the stuff that I think is most relevant to Dots and Loops' sound. And it gets weird enough, believe me. First up, Can with Future Days. Can is most likely the best example of a krautrock band. They really had this crazy psychedelic jam sound for many of their albums, and yet Future Days, the album here, is actually not that jammy, not that psychedelic, and not that rocky. It's got a lot of these ambient moments. It's actually kind of mellow. It's something you can listen to late at night. I think that Future Days is very relevant to Stereolab, both because it's very groovy and has this kind of quiet build-up quality to it, and because, it's looking toward the future, just like Stereolab were in like a retro futuristic way. I'm going to get more to that idea later in the video. Next up, I want to talk about Cluster with Soy So. I categorize these a bit differently in my graphic guide, but I'm just going to kind of do it all in one go on this video. This is much more at the ambient end of the krautrock spectrum. I know Future Day is definitely a sort of ambient, but this is like really ambient music. Like, I don't even know if it really qualifies as rock much at all. It's still very good though, and yet it has this very unsettling, eerie feel to it. Sure, it might be ambient music, but it's not relaxing ambient music. Next up, I'm going to talk about Kraftwerk, kind of the least krautrock album of the German albums I'm talking about, but still very relevant to Stereolab sound. And the album that I'm going to pick for them is, let's go with Autobahn. I could have picked a bunch of different Kraftwerk albums. I think they're such an interesting band with such a diverse history. My next album, Super, one of the future ones, is going to be David Bowie, and he was super influenced by Kraftwerk, so I will talk more about them in the future. Autobahn has, I think, just like a very iconic title track. It's like 20 minutes long. It's so repetitive. It's like the same song 4 times, but I have so much fun with Kraftwerk. Fun on the Autobahn. Just give this a listen. It might not be your cup of tea at first, but I think it'll grow on you. It grew on me for sure. Next up, a bit more of a classic balance between ambience and rock on Neu. I think that's how you say it, Neu 75. It kind of opens with some more ambient songs and gets a little rockier on the back half. Nonetheless, the songs are all pretty long. They've got a lot of repetitive kind of motifs and elements to them. I think it's very relevant to understanding longer Stereolab songs, and it's a classic of krautrock, one of the most famous albums out there in this like micro scene, so give it a listen. The next album I have is also one of the most famous krautrock albums. It's Faust with Faust 4. This one still has a lot of variety in it, but it's a lot more rocky. It has an opening track called Krautrock, which is arguably like the mission statement or manifesto of krautrock as a whole. But then it goes into these weird songs like Jennifer or The Sad Skinhead or whatever that all kind of have different vibes. So it's almost pop, just with a lot of weird avant-garde rock sounds, but like it got that pop album structure, and that the songs don't all kind of have the same stylistic base, and they kind of vary it up. Last up, Harmonia with Music von Harmonia. This is a super group of Neu and Cluster, who I talked about already. Also, a lot of long, kind of rhythmic looping stuff. I don't think that this really adds too much to the table in terms of krautrock that these other groups didn't, but it's another helping of pretty good stuff. Okay, for our last conventional stop on a world tour, we're going to France, whose pop music of the 60s and 70s definitely also influenced Stereolab, without a doubt. We're going to start with what might be the best French pop album ever, the best one that I've heard for sure, which is Serge Gainsbourg with Histoire de Melody Nelson. This album definitely has a weird narrative that I won't get into at all, but I think that the music itself is so amazing, and I don't speak French, so thankfully I can kind of tune out the possibly disturbing lyrics. It opens and closes with these smoky, long, spoken word tracks, but then in the middle are just amazing pop songs that are just so melodic and beautiful and everything like that. It's just such a great album. Next up, another album that's, well, at least French pop and has more of that song and chanson style would be François Hardy with La Question. All the music on this album was composed by Tuca, a Brazilian guitarist, and I think these minimal arrangements really suit Hardy's singing style, so I really like this album as well. Her husband was also a popular French musician, Jacques Dutronc, and I'm going to suggest his album Et moi, et moi, et moi. This album is pretty prototypical yeye from what I understand, and yeye is like a derivative genre. It was French musicians in the 60s imitating American and British rock. Think of like Yeah Yeah from the Beatles. It's French Yeah Yeah. So I think this album is a lot less original and exciting than these other ones, but this album still has this very irreverent energy to it that Stereolab also usually have. And so for that reason, I think it still fits on a list like this. Another album, though, that definitely fits on a list like this because it's not derivative at all and is weird is Brigitte Fontaine with Faux. She has actually collaborated with Laetitia Sadier, so there's definitely a crossover there. Stereolab has worked with so many people over the years that I'm sure they've worked with someone else on this list that I didn't even realize, and I'll find out later. But this is a bit more avant pop. It's weird. It's still got some catchiness to it, but it's pretty bizarre and yet good, very good, and definitely worth listening to. Though I gotta be honest, Faux does not come close in weirdness to this next pick, Jean-Claude Veneer with L'Enfant Assassin des Mouches. I don't know how well my French pronunciation was. This instrumental album, mostly instrumental album, has some really wild sources. It's kind of almost like Zappa, just a little bit. He collaborated with Gainsbourg, this artist did, and so I guess you can hear some of that, but it's really wild. There's so much going on. Can't recommend enough. My last French album is a soundtrack, actually, which I think makes sense given that Stereolab was very much into soundtracks. They said that they give them more freedom to experiment than on pop albums. I guess on pop albums, people kind of expect something, whereas on soundtracks, they're a bit more open-minded to other stuff. And so they took inspiration from people like Ennio Morricone. But I'm going to choose Francie Lai with Un homme et une femme as my final entry into the French category here. It's French jazz. It's got that noir element you would very much want from a French movie from the 60s. I don't know if it's a like French new wave or whatever because I'm not as versed in film as I'd like to be, and I don't really know much about that stuff, but it's got that French noir element, and it's also got some bossa nova elements in the soundtrack too. So very cool soundtrack, definitely check out. Okay, and traveling the world with Stereolab, we are actually now going to travel out of this world, still with Stereolab, going to some outer space elements that influenced the band too, because they were actually influenced by so much weird stuff that the world is not enough to contain their interest in music. My first recommendation is Antenna with Camino del Sol. These guys sound the closest to any other group I've heard to Stereolab that came up before them. They're certainly a bit more electronic and bossa nova and less rock than Stereolab were, but their DNA, their sonic DNA, has a lot in common. It's a shame they didn't really put much out, although apparently Isabelle Antenna, the lead singer, has a solo catalog that I will go check out, but this album is so cool. Definitely up your alley if you like Stereolab. Next up, I'm going to talk about Walter Wanderley with Moon Dreams. This could have almost made the Brazilian category just because it does. He was from Brazil. He's collaborated with Astro Gilberto, and it has a lot of that Brazilian stuff, but it's weird at the same time. He made it electric, and it kind of has this space age, loungy music vibe that some of these other outer space picks have. I'm going to kind of elaborate on that as I get deeper into these picks. Yeah, this album is interesting. It's spacey. It's very 60s nostalgic, I guess, and belongs in Stereolab's influences, I'd say. Next up, we have Esquivel with Space Age Bachelor Pad. Now, this is a compilation. Stereolab have an EP that took this name, so they're clearly inspired by Esquivel, literally. Now, I guess, would be as good a time as any to kind of talk about exotica music. This was a genre of pop, or like a subgenre of pop in the late 50s and early 60s. Sometimes it was done better than others. There were certain artists who would make albums about the South Pacific or make albums about faraway places and exoticize them and subject them to like a white American, usually male colonial gaze. Some unsettling stuff. Definitely not good to make these real people and places into some type of fantasies, even if they are like island paradise fantasies. Yet Esquivel gets a bit of a pass. It's not quite as bad because he was a more interesting artist. First of all, he fused Latin jazz with this exotica stuff that he made. And second of all, he didn't really, as far as I know, base his aesthetics on real places like the South Pacific. He was all about space. He was called the king of space age pop. And even if space age pop sounds like the Jetsons and sounds like something that was left behind in the 60s for a very good reason. It's very interesting music, and I can respect Esquivel a lot as an artist for fusing these sounds and making something unique. I will talk more about other exotica albums in some of the later categories, but for now I'm going to stick to other space albums. Next up, I have Television with Marquee Moon. You might be surprised to see this here because Marquee Moon does not really sound anything like Dots and Loops, but Tim Gain, Stereolab's real musical brains, was huge into avant-garde and punk music when he was younger. And even though making Stereolab was kind of a step away from that stuff, I do think that these albums are still part of his and therefore the band's sonic DNA. And besides, as far as post-punk goes, Marquee Moon is very melodic, it's very jangly, it's very accessible. It's a wonderful album. Definitely check it out, especially if you aren't super into post-punk, because this album might be kind of the thing to get you there. Next up, I have Chrome with Alien Soundtracks, broadly categorizable as post-punk as well, and another album that Tim Gain said he was into in his youth. He, in an interview, had like 10 albums, which is so helpful for me for making this list. And this was another one of them. I had not heard of this one, though, but now I love it because it's really ahead of its time. It's got noise and tape loops and other like science fiction stuff, and even some like proto-industrial sounds along with the post-punk. It sounds like it's really difficult to listen to and is super avant-garde, but it's actually not. Like, it doesn't give you ear fatigue or anything like that. I do think this album is really cool. Check it out. Alien Soundtrack. Sounds like it could have been broadcast from aliens. My last album for space is The Cleaners from Venus with Midnight Cleaners. This one is another album that I guess you might not necessarily hear an instant connection between this and Dots and Loops, but I think that they were both part of the alternative scene in the UK in the late 80s and early 90s and everything, and these guys are very jangly. I'm not the biggest fan of jangle pop, but this album is fun, it's cute. They definitely have a DIY aesthetic to them that I respect, something that Stereolab also had, and I think that they belong in a list of Stereolab influences. Okay, we are kind of done with our travels, but we're still talking about bands and albums that influenced Stereolab. But this next section are going to be collaborators, people who worked on Dots and Loops or who otherwise were part of Stereolab's community of making music. My first album recommendation is Pram, Dark Island. Pram put out some music on Stereolab's actual label, Duophonic Records. Not many people know that Stereolab have a label, so fun fact, very cool place to check out some of their EPs that you might overlook but are very good, or other bands that they liked and worked with, like Pram. I don't think this album was put out there, but I don't really care. It's still the same band, and it still definitely sounds Stereolab-esque. This album is a bit more whimsical, a bit more jazzy, and a little more like sci-fi, I guess. I have liked other Pram stuff in the past, but I think this is my favorite Pram album that I've heard so far. Definitely give it a listen if you're into Stereolab, which if you're this far in the video, I'm pretty sure you are. Next up, I have Tortoise with TNT. This is because John McEntire produced a large part of Dots and Loops, and he's also one of the key members of the band Tortoise. Post-rock gods, I'd be pretty surprised if you haven't heard of them and you have heard of Stereolab. This is one of their most well-known albums, along with Millions Now Living Will Never Die. Either one could have really been in the spot. I just chose this one because I guess it's got these like hypnotic grooves, and that's a bit more of the focus. They're both great albums. Definitely give it a listen if you want to get more into post-rock. Next up, I have the High Llamas with Hawaii. Sean O'Hagan was another frequent Stereolab collaborator. This album is very clearly inspired by the Beach Boys, by Brian Wilson's work in the 60s. It definitely is kind of putting a spin on the exotica stuff that I mentioned earlier, which is why it's not really an exotic album, which is a good thing. Instead, it takes place in Hawaii, but it has that kind of darkness beneath it. I mean, think of Brian Wilson's sunny music versus Brian Wilson, the tragic private individual. Think of this sunny music with a lot of darkness kind of underneath the surface. Super creative album. Definitely like a mind-expanding album. I definitely give it a strong recommendation. Next up, another album in the South Pacific, which is Eora Tahiti by Mouse on Mars. These guys also were big in producing Dots and Loops, and yet it's not really exotica, even though it has some of those elements here and there, just like the last album did, and that's okay. It's mostly an IDM album, very cool electronic music, very 90s. Next up, I have Brokeback with Looks at the Bird. This is another post-rock album. Douglas McCombs, who's one of the members of Brokeback, is also in Tortoise, so the bands are almost like sister bands or cousin bands or whatever. It's still very post-rocky. It has a very similar sound to Tortoise, a bit more loopy perhaps, but also something that is worth your while if you like similar vibes. My last collaborator album is Broadcast with the Noise Made by People. Broadcast, another band that first of all gets compared to Stereolab a lot and also released music on Duophonic Records. I love this album, one of my favorite dream pop albums ever. Talk about hypnotic. I mean, I have listened to some of these songs over and over and over, just trying to pick up on more subtle details just because I find it so entrancing. Love this album. Beautiful vocals, beautiful instrumentals. Cannot recommend this one enough. Okay, I am almost done talking about Stereolab's influences. I just have a few more albums I want to throw in just kind of as wrapping up loose ends. First up, I have Vanishing Twin with The Age of Immunology. My partner mentioned this one when I was telling her about doing my Stereolab research because she thought that they had a similar sound, and they kind of do. These guys are a more modern group. They have a much more modern sound, kind of like 2010s indie pop, definitely more R&B and psychedelia stuff, like modern psychedelia stuff. But they definitely have a similar musical DNA, and it's worth checking them out if you like Stereolab. Next up, I have The Free Design with Kites Are Fun. I think Stereolab has a song either called The Free Design or Kites Are Fun. I can't remember which, but clearly named after this band. This is a Baroque pop album from the 60s, what's sometimes called sunshine pop. Super cool album, wonderful layered vocals, wonderful instrumentation. I definitely hear the influence that Stereolab got from these guys, and I definitely think you should check them out. And my next album recommendation is also a sunshine pop album. Man, this seems to be an overlooked genre if you ask me. This is Wendy and Bonnie with Genesis. I mean, these two were teenage sisters when they wrote this album, 17 and 13 years old, if I remember correctly. Just amazing stuff. It has psychedelic whimsy, of course. They were from San Francisco, the epicenter of psychedelic counterculture in the 60s. It sounds like San Francisco, and yet they're clearly skilled musicians as well. They're not just hacking away on instruments. They have jazz and folk elements as well, and I am grateful to Stereolab for bringing these bands to my attention. Next up, I want to talk about Aksak Mabul, I hope I said that right, with Onze Dents pour combattre la migraine. One of the most stylistically diverse albums of the whole guide. I know I've said that a lot today, but man, they have pop and classical and jazz, but they're so silly and whimsical that they don't take themselves super seriously. They have a really interesting approach towards this stuff. Definitely a fun, weird thing to listen to. Next up, I want to talk about Suicide with their self-titled album. I don't really know how the censorship works on YouTube, so I hope that this doesn't have any consequences for my algorithm or anything, but this album is post-punk, but with a dark, cold wave spin on it. I've heard them described as no wave as well. Another album that Tim Gain liked when he was younger. I really appreciate using long, repetitive songs with some kind of bass and electronic sounds and whatever to make political statements, even if this is like harsh on the ears and Stereolab is often easy on the ears. That being said, a really cool album, really like it. And, you know, it was kind of a wild card to throw in here, but I'm doing it. My last album, perhaps it's a fitting album just because of how bizarre it is Sun Ra with Exotica. Sun Ra is primarily known as an avant-garde jazz musician, one of the most avant-garde artists of the latter half of the 20th century. Also a key figure in Afrofuturism. Very interesting guy, released a ton of music, like I want to say hundreds of albums in his life. Not very accessible, super weird stuff much of the time. This album, though, is pretty different than most of his other stuff. It's a collection of exotica songs he wrote in the late 50s and early 60s, when that was the like era of that music kind of having a bit of an audience. And unlike a lot of his contemporaries who might have made exotica like kind of in a Hollywood-esque setting where they were glamorizing and gazing at other parts of the world, Sun Ra was doing this for a very different reason. You know, I think he was living in Chicago at the time. As a black man, he was oppressed on a daily basis in a myriad of ways, and this exotica music was a way for him to escape this physical oppression. Besides, the cover art of this is like a faraway planet. It doesn't really feel kind of disrespecting any actual humans or any actual culture or anything like that. So this is a very interesting exotica album. Stereolab also said that Sun Ra was a huge influence on them in how they made loops and stuff. I know I've said that perhaps a bunch of times in this video, but apparently Sun Ra was like the guy for how to loop things. And yeah, I couldn't really find it what album they might have been talking about in his more well-known albums. But when I found out he made this exotica album, or it's actually more of a compilation, but still, when I found out a Sun Ra exotica compilation existed, I decided that that was the album that was going to belong in this guide. Thanks so much for watching. I had a great time researching Stereolab's influences. This guide took me many months to prepare. As a matter of fact, I started it a while back during the summer, and then I kind of postponed it because I realized I just had to dig through so much music I was unfamiliar with, and kind of did some other guides that were a bit briefer in scope and then came back to it. And it was so much fun to do. I'm really happy it's done now. Stereolab's political and lyrical ideas and messages are also incredibly interesting, but this is not the video to talk about them. I might bring them up in a future video or a short or something like that. But thank you so much for watching. I have many more of these guides in the works, and I appreciate you traveling the world with me, with the band, to discover a myriad of more music.